You're listening to Food Rebels, and welcome. This is the podcast that brings you brands, chefs, and live on-air tastings. A show that's dedicated to the more rebellious side of the food world, where we celebrate the people who have challenged the status quo. We'll be giving you a peek behind the curtains and inside the minds of the people who are shaking up our food industry. You know me, I'm the show host, AJ Sharp, taste expert, food writer, great taste food judge, and of course, business owner. I love meeting new people and tasting new foods. So, sit back as we hear more stories from people in food who dare to be different. Welcome. Today on Food Rebels, I'm joined by someone who has carved out a truly unique career in food. Philippa Davis is a private chef, food writer and presenter who has worked in some of London's most exciting kitchens before moving into the world of private chefing, a path that has taken her all over the globe, cooking for some of the world's most demanding and fascinating clients, which we're going to hear a little bit more about today. Alongside chefing, Philippa has built a name as a food writer and food TV presenter, even fronting her own series, A Taste of Dorset, now available on Amazon Prime. We're going to hear more about her journey. Philippa Davis, welcome to Food Rebels.
Hello, how lovely to be on. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for squeezing us in. You have literally just kind of flown in from somewhere, about to fly out somewhere else, aren't you? What are you up to?
Well, private chef-wise, it's a really busy kind of 3 months. I'm almost at the end of it now, but I'm basically living out of a suitcase. So my suitcase is in the hall, ready. I came back, what was about I actually have no idea what day of the week it is, but I think I came back about two days ago. Emmy unpacked, repacked, and then I'm off again at like 1:30 in the morning, back to, I'm off to Marseille in Provence.
Amazing. Can you tell us who you've been cooking for? Or is it just a variety of private clients?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a private chef now for about 15 years. So a lot of my clients are repeat, which is really lovely because it's a very kind of intimate job. You know, you kind of really get to, you're living, you're traveling with people. So it's really nice when you can build up a relationship. This is someone actually who I met through another client when I very first started private chefing that I'm off to now. And they're very kind of social, bon vivant. So it's like one of my ideal clients because they just love to eat, love to party. So hopefully, and also obviously the markets down in Provence are pretty exceptional, particularly at this time of the year, because we're kind of creeping in, we've got all the summer produce just creeping into those autumnal, squashes and other kind of, nuts and things. And I think probably a bit too early for the kind of the autumnal truffles, but I might see one, who knows? I mean, the joy of discovering a market.
That's amazing. So are you on holiday with one family or group of people for the whole time? Or are you doing lots of different separate jobs? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first started private chefing, I had no idea how it worked because there's very little really written about what it's like to be a private chef, what the work is, partly because you have to be very discreet because you are working for the kind of, I guess, the rich and the famous, and you're invited into people's homes. So, you want to have this element of trust, hence why I think there is so little really information out there. And quite often, I mean, when I started, I signed up with some agencies. And again, I think they just don't like to bug the client with too many details. So you can literally be signed up to this job. They'll kind of have a look at your CV. And I used to work at the River Cafe in London, a Michelin-starred restaurant. And I used to work at Moro, a Spanish Middle Eastern restaurant. So I had these kind of lovely, well-known restaurants on my CV. So people kind of understood what kind of cooking I would do for them and what kind of approach my food was. But, I remember, one job, it was like, I thought I was just kind of cooking for a family. I can't remember where it was. I think it was an island it was going to be. And so I get there, and then the client is like, actually, we're off to Ibiza. And I was like, oh,
Whoa.
okay. I mean, that was kind of quite a big thing in your job to think that you're going to do one place and then you're selling the other. And then she starts giving me this kind of list of meat that she wants me to go and get from her butcher to take with her. She's like, the vegetables are amazing, the wine's amazing, the fish is extraordinary. Ibiza's got an incredible, in the Old Town, market where you have to go very early as a private chef, like kind of 6 a.m. And it's full of locals drinking their first little beer or glass of wine and private chefs with their clients' credit cards kind of spending like the Rockefellers. But anyway, so she was like, but I want you to go and get the meat from the butcher. So I kind of start writing this list, and she's very particular about the kind of the type of meat she wants and how she wants it trimmed. And then I was like, so how are we actually going to take all this meat to Ibiza then? She's like, well, we've got a private jet. And I was like, as casually as if like, well, we've got a front door. I mean, what do you mean?
I love it.
So I was suddenly kind of exposed to this very new and different world. And of course, just as a chef and someone who loves food and ingredients and understanding where they came from, I suddenly was getting to go to these places of like, seeing the market, seeing where the olive oil is grown, going to talk to the farmer, watching the mozzarella come out in its little balls. And it's an extraordinary thing to be able to go and do.
That's amazing. So you must get to know, the people that you're chefing for really well over the time. If you're spending like a whole week with them, I mean, I don't imagine you're rolling in from the clubs and going straight to the market though in the morning if you're in Ibiza.
Well, you say that. I mean, every client is very different how you interact with them. And I mean, that's one of the big differences between a restaurant chef and a private chef. So obviously as a restaurant chef, you're kind of very much in those bounds of what is that brand of restaurant, what is that concept of restaurant, whether it's Italian like the River Cafe or Spanish or Middle Eastern like Moro. Suddenly, as a private chef, you're going into people's homes. You're obviously in different kitchens, different countries, cooking for different occasions. So you might be helping them kind of kickstart a health diet. You might be just kind of doing kids' suppers. You might suddenly be asked to do a dinner party for a president. Like, I mean, every day is so varied. And then obviously all the clients that I've worked in very formal household where there is, butlers, maids, laundry wings, three
sort of
kitchens,
upstairs, downstairs, nobody talks.
Upstairs, downstairs.
Wow.
Well, even so, actually, I mean, there's been ones where it was, it was like working in Downton Abbey. It wasn't Downton Abbey, but, might as well have been.
Yeah.
But then, they'd still want to have their afternoon teas or their lunches in the kitchen. So, they're kind of chatting away. But with one of those immaculate kitchens where like even the dishcloths were beautiful. And I was just terrified to like open any tins just in case I got a splash of tomato on their beautiful white tiles. Like it was kind of terrifying working in that kitchen. And then I've got other clients who, I've known for, 15 years. And, I've watched the kids grow up. So you get very attached to people because, now these kids who were kind of in their nappies are starting to, apply to university or,
wow.
And, you become very attached to your clients.
That's incredible. What a position of great privilege. I mean, you said there it wasn't, when you first kind of started private chefing, you were exposed to this world that was very different to where you had grown up. What was it like for you growing up? You weren't on private yachts and private jets and...
No, I mean, an exciting day of our childhood was suddenly So I grew up in Dorset on a small farm and I grew up with my parents and my grandparents. So we had this kind of generational addition, which was really lovely. My aunt and uncle lived with us for a while and my cousins and I'm dyslexic, and so I kind of really struggled with the conventional schooling. So my parents thought it'd be a great idea if I was home educated because then everyone can kind of chip in. We ran a furniture business on site. We ran the farm. So we reared all our own animals to eat. We grew all our own fruit and vegetables. We made our own bread. We made our own goat's yogurt. We even had a go at winemaking. But I mean, it was so revolting. I think even as a kind of 12-year-old, I was like, do you know what? I'm not going to drink that. But so food was a huge part of my childhood. And because I was home educated, once I'd finished those kind of daily lessons that the government requires you to do, I could kind of hop outside and help with the animals. I mean, my grandfather was instrumental with my love for food because he'd be the one particularly in charge of the garden, particularly in charge of the cooking. So I'd often help him in the kitchen. And then, rarely probably was there less than 10 of us around the kind of farmhouse kitchen table. So it was very much simple food, kind of stews, tomatoes on toast, but they were homegrown and also just understanding preparing a meal and sitting down together, the joy and discussions that can come from that. So the connection that you get through a plate of food, and it can be a very simple plate of food, but it's just this extraordinary amount of goodness that you get from it.
And a real richness of different experiences, like you say, with the multi-generations of, grandparents going, we never had this in the war, or, all these other stories that come in around food that I can never look at sugar without hearing my grandmother pointing to the sugar pot on the table at home and saying that was as much sugar as we had for a whole week, for a whole family, and looking at it and thinking, what? We get through that in, no time at all.
That approach as well to not wasting anything really came from my grandparents because they were young during the Second World War and rationing, obviously. And so the respect for food is extraordinary. And this is something I kind of think about with some of my clients, because you'd think, well, wealthy people might just not care about, how much they're wasting. And sadly, there are, and this can happen to anyone, but, people who just, I don't think they understand and appreciate the value of what it takes, the energy and the time for food to be made or grown. But then I've got a lot of clients, because I think generally if you're hiring a private chef, you're probably really into food, like ultra zero waste. So yeah, one of my clients, like, even so much that, like, you know, they'll eat the corn and then they'll make sure the corn center is kept to then put into a Chinese kind of medicinal stock or something. So, you know, just like really thinking about everything. And, you know, we'll freeze all the parsley stalks, and again, that'll all go into broths. So I really love and appreciate people who understand the value of food and how much has gone into it in order to kind of, you know, make sure the most is made from it.
That's fantastic. It does come though, doesn't it, with having the time. You know, there's all these things that we all would love to do, and we'd love to be really mindful about every single piece of waste. But having, you know, I suppose if you've got the time to do that and to then create the stock later, I spend my life feeling guilty basically for throwing away peelings and scraps and thinking about potato peel pies in Guernsey and things like that. Gosh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I still live in Dorset, and we've got a compost heap, and we kind of grow some of our own, but not on the scale nearly as that we did it as kids, but, you know, growing some of our own vegetables. So actually, like, I would never make a potato peel pie. I'll be honest. I think, you know, just because you can eat something doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
But they will often not peel the potatoes, to be honest, in the first place, because there's a lot of nutrition in the skin. So I'll just scrub them clean and that'll be that. But, you know, if you can compost, obviously that's kind of a way around it, because it's still going back into the cycle, the nutrition there. I mean, and making stocks and stuff, to me, like, I just have a Ziploc bag in the freezer. So I'll chuck in a bit of onion or a bit of parsley stalk. And then during the winter, we make a lot of pheasant stocks, you know, because being in the countryside, you know, there are pheasants everywhere. And actually pheasant meat is one of the most nutritious, nutrient dense, you know, far more so than chicken. So we'll make a lovely pheasant stock, and then I'll just grab that bag from the freezer and chuck it in. I can't really remember what's in there, you know, bits of fennel or whatever. So it's very low maintenance, and to me it's important. Like, I mean, yes, we're all busy, but I kind of think there is probably nothing more important you can do than feed yourself well and, you know, put good stuff inside you.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's fascinating. You said just then that you were home educated and you had this multi-generation. How do you think that's actually kind of influenced your life going forwards? Did you feel that you were having a very different experience to other children?
I don't think I realised how weird my childhood was until I was kind of slightly older. Because obviously, I mean, you know what you know at the time. And it's only now that I've started talking more about my kind of, I guess, more unusual kind of career path, that I think, gosh, actually, that was pretty incredible to have that kind of childhood, especially when you look out just generally in the world. And, you know, there will be kids who don't know what a chip is made from, where a potato is grown, what a potato plant looks like. Or so, I mean, it shaped everything, being able to have that connection to food and understanding of the importance of food and not wasting it and valuing it. And then, you know, because my grandfather, it's funny, so my grandfather in particular, he was a very experimental cook. So, you know, because I think you can kind of think of, oh, well, grandparents are going to make stews and casseroles, delicious, but, you know, obviously it's kind of like this home comfort traditional food. Whereas my grandfather would always be, you know, if there was a new ingredient about, or he would, like, when I think it must have been before I was private chefing, but I was talking when I worked at the River Cafe, oh, there's this amazing cabbage called Cavolo Nero, you know, because it wasn't trendy like 20 years ago. And he said, oh, that sounds interesting. So next time I came home, like, he'd got this whole plot of Cavolo Nero planted and borlotti beans and all these kind of new to him, new Italian vegetables that he was very excited about. So he was very open-minded. I think, you know, as a chef, as a private chef, you know, if you are open-minded and willing to explore different food cultures, you know, not just different ingredients, different cooking techniques, you know, because some of my clients will really be into kind of steaming veg, others will be, you know, I don't know, much more into barbecuing, for instance. And, you know, you don't, rather than, you know, when you go into a restaurant, like, you know, there'll be a pasta section, there'll be a grill section. Every time to go to a new client's home, they'll have different pieces of equipment. And so, yeah, continually kind of like pushing boundaries and comfort zones.
It's amazing. You kind of grew up on this farm in Dorset and you kind of had this beautiful richness of food education. Then you moved to London. How did you decide what career to start in at that point? Had you already kind of found your love of being a chef?
I knew I loved food, and then at 14, I think it was, I started as a Saturday job in a kitchen, and actually the kitchen was amazing. So it was run by these two women, and one was this opera singer. And when things got kind of busy in the kitchen, she'd burst into these Italian arias. And like, as a little girl, a young girl, I was kind of just totally in awe of this kind of fierce bold, brave woman. So I kind of, and the kitchen was super hot, it was fast, it was furious. So I think I was just hooked into hospitality very early on. And I kind of had I briefly went to university. I did my first year at geography at Royal Holloway, and I just, I did all my exams and everything, and they were going very well, but it just wasn't for me. And I remember coming back to do some holiday work to earn some money, and I remember and I've never had this before again since, but I had this epiphany moment of cleaning the fridge after a really busy Saturday lunch service, thinking, that's it, I'm going to London, I'm going to be a chef. So I go home and tell my parents, and they're amazingly supportive. They're like, you have to do what you feel you want to do. If university isn't for you, that's fine. So I kind of packed my bags and off I went to London, and I started, my first job was actually at Lidgate's The Butchers, which is in Holland Park. It's a sixth generation butcher now.
Yeah, I know it.
Huge quality. Nigella Lawson's a huge fan, and David Lidgate, who's sadly passed now, but he was in charge at the time. He used to take me to the meat market at like 4 a.m. Wow. And it was like walking around with God, though, because David Lidgate was the king of butchers. So we'd go around Smithfield Meat Market, and I don't know if you've been, but it's a beautiful building, but you go behind and they've got the kind of all the carcasses hanging up. And so he'd take me, and he'd like the shopkeeper would be standing with us, and he'd grab this huge carcass and he'd be like, right, Philippa, why am I not going to buy this piece of meat? And he'd kind of make me kind of look at the fat content and the colour and looking at the moisture. And so that was my first job in London.
What a wealth of knowledge, though, for you. I bet, do you still draw on that now when you're sourcing things for your clients?
Well, again, this was one of my first things of thinking, this is a bit weird, because obviously, we grew all our own meat growing up, but I didn't think about good and bad quality meat, and I never thought about some animals are better treated than others and have to go less far to the slaughterhouse. But when, of course, you go into the commercial world, or you just open your eyes and your horizons a little bit more, you start thinking about, okay, well, so there is choice and variety out there. So if you're going to choose to eat meat, kind of what kind of meat ideally would you like to eat if you can? So I think there was kind of, I'd been exposed to great quality meat, but I didn't necessarily understand about what it meant, maybe how it translated into cooking, and then once you start purchasing, if you run a restaurant or in your own home, like what you should be looking for.
Well, yeah, and your exposure had only been to really good husbandry and meat that had been really well looked after and well raised. So I guess it was hard for you to even imagine what it could be like if it hadn't been done the way you knew it to be done.
Yeah, and I think you need to see poor examples to understand sometimes what a good example is, particularly, like in the colour of meat or the wetness, like in how it's been hung, and fat content, different breeds. We only had a certain, I can't remember which breed we had, maybe Dorset Downs sheep. But, when you start looking at different lamb, different pork, the different ratios to fat to meat. So it was, I was worked there for a couple of months, and it was just a really interesting new way of looking at raw ingredients. I remember as a child.
And did you go from...
I was just going to say, just remember as a child, like, you'd have all the lovely lambs in the field, and then you'd go out for the day, and then you'd come back and they'd all be in bags ready for the freezer on the table.
As only the farm kids who just like, oh yeah, it's Dolly. It's fine.
Dolly. Yeah, exactly.
So did you go from Lidgate then to the River Cafe? Where did you decide that you were going to go into chefing?
Well, I knew I really wanted to be a chef. So Lidgate's was just kind of like getting my foot into London and understanding that, I come from Shaftesbury and Dorset, which is a gorgeous kind of, town, but fairly quiet. And I remember, my first kind of Sunday in London, and like, oh my gosh, there's shops open and it's PM on a Sunday night. This is wild. But yeah, so then I moved to the River Cafe, and that was that was probably one of the most extraordinary things I've done in my career, because it's just so well known and respected amongst kind of foodies worldwide, really, because what they've done there is they focus so heavily on just the provenance and quality of the ingredients. And, the actual cooking is relatively simple, but they really understand about hospitality, so making you feel very welcome and relaxed. It's not, even though it has a Michelin star, they're very clever at making everyone feel very welcome. There's no snootiness there. There's no kind of, oh, we're so fancy. But what you have is this extraordinary quality and warmth and hospitality. And, reflecting on that, private chefing is not just about the cooking. It's about being able to create a very welcoming environment.
Yeah, there's something about River Cafe. Whenever I meet anyone who has worked there, whether they were a chef or whether they were in the service side of things, they're always so proud about the way they talk about the place. It obviously just, even for the people who work there, they feel very proud to have worked there.
I mean, they've got an amazing alumni. If you think, Jamie Oliver, Hugh Fanning-Whittingstall, April Bloomfield, Theo Randall, the list goes on. And I think it's because they had such a clear concept of what they were doing in terms of how they wanted to treat their chefs. I mean, there are still chefs. I worked there 25 years ago, maybe. And there are still chefs there today that were there in my time, because that is how well they are treated. That is how much part of the family they feel, which is, I mean, that is so rare. I don't know if I can name many other restaurants, maybe Sally Clark's or something, but very few people will stay at the same restaurant for that long a time.
That's amazing. So you're in London, and you're what, 19, 20 at this point? And
yeah.
I mean, how was that whole period of time? Because you worked at River Cafe, then you moved on and you worked at the Italian restaurant. What was that like?
Well, I worked at, so River Cafe is Italian, and then I went to work at Moro. Moro was exciting because they actually, Sam and Sam, who run Moro, they've got fantastic cookbooks out. So if anyone hasn't discovered them yet, they're just, they're kind of Spanish, Middle Eastern, Turkish focused. And this is where, when I first started working there, I was the only female besides Samantha, the boss, in the kitchen. So it was this very kind of lively, slightly chaotic, well, not, maybe slightly chaotic sense, but, I was very kind of, I guess, ambitious. So I got in there. And usually you're just going to start off on the colds and the salad section and desserts. But I kind of had my eye on that. They had a proper charcoal Turkish pit to cook on. And I was like, I want that section. So I kind of got my elbows out, fought the boys off it. And then, for like pretty much the next 2 years, I was just on the charcoal section, learning to kind of really, because it's such an art controlling the coals, particularly if you're doing long services for like 2.5, 3 hours. And so it's quite funny now. So as a private chef, when I go and do barbecues at people's houses, A, I'm very snooty if it's only a gas barbecue, I'm afraid. It's like, what is the point? Like, and then B, it's so funny, like, even though I've been a chef for 20 years or whatever, if I'm lighting up a barbecue or a smoker, the boys, the men, cannot help but come and say like, oh, do you need a hand? Do you know what you're doing? And it's like, yes, I kind of do.
I actually really do. And you probably maybe don't.
Yeah, you have to be very polite, though. There's no kind of throwing chef's tantrums. So as a private chef, it's all about being kind of smiley and charming the whole time. So I have to kind of like, oh, yes, well, I have done this before. And then, if they say something that I might not agree with, like a cooking technique or temperatures, I'll be like, well, I think I'll try it this way.
Yes, I may practice this.
Yeah, after I finished at Moro, I went on to open up a restaurant on Mudchute City Farm, which is London's largest city farm. It's just behind Canary Wharf. And it was interesting because I got to kind of run the business and create the business. But we built a wood oven there. We built a proper charcoal. It was kind of like it was a home country city living for me, because we had an allotment. We could forage from the 32 acres. But then and that would be bringing me up to like 10 years restaurant work. And I kind of hit a ceiling. I could just feel my love for food draining away. It's so relentless. I mean, it's extraordinary being a chef, but it's relentless. It's tiring. When you're running a business, like, you really just don't have a day off, and when that goes over years, it does kind of wear you down. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have to make a change. And I thought, well, someone suggested, why don't you do private chefing? And like I was saying earlier, very little is written about private chefing. So I thought it would be this easy kind of hop into just like earning a bit of money while I sort out my next restaurant kind of serious career move. And I, despite the first few years being incredibly challenging, I kind of totally fell in love with the kind of the different dynamics, the different energy, going into different places, different kitchens, different cultures. And so 15 years on, I am still a private chef. So there was no such thing as, oh, I'm just going to be a private chef for a few months while I sort myself out. It's like, this is totally the life for me. But over the first kind of few years, I realized this is a really extraordinary experience, getting to go to the markets in Singapore, in Israel, in the Caribbean, and then suddenly cooking for like stalking parties in Scotland, fancy 5-course dinners in Paris for a prime minister. So I was like, well, I have to still be discreet, because that is part of the kind of ethical code of being a private chef. But I can kind of talk about these experiences. So I started a blog called Postcard Recipes. And the idea is that when I was traveling, I used to write a postcard home with a recipe onto my family and friends, rather than going, oh, hi, I'm in Mallorca, the weather's lovely. I'd just write them like a Mallorcan inspired recipe. So I kind of then turned that into a blog. And then I realized how much I loved kind of putting down and thinking more about my experiences. And then I did, as a lot of writers do, you just start pitching into magazines and articles, wanting to share your experiences. And I ended up the cookery writer for Field magazine, because by that time I'd started to cook for a lot of stalking parties, a lot of shooting parties, fishing parties. And although I didn't come from a family at all that shot, we'd eaten a bit of pheasant because we lived in the countryside as a kid. But then as a private chef, getting to go to the estates and understanding how much work and goes into the land and how many people it involves getting this incredible ingredient on the plate. I mean, as a chef, like pheasant meat, grouse, if you can get it, which is, just come into season on 12th of August. It's one of those ingredients that you smell it and it just gives you goosebumps because it is so unique. It's so heathery and off the hill. So I was, really, it was good. It was great to become the cookery writer of the Field, because it was generally ingredients that I thought were extraordinary. But of course, not coming from a traditional background, not being a shooter, shooting myself, I was trying to open up to a whole new audience of just like, this is this ingredient that we have these days. It can be fresh, it can be modern, it doesn't have to be traditionally cooked. You can, combine it with all these incredible local seasonal ingredients in Britain. So it's kind of fresh, modern take on game, I'd say, my cookery writing.
It's amazing. And I've got this beautiful book here, Deepest Somerset, which you have done all the food for this book, haven't you? And there's actually a foreword from King Charles, and it's just the most beautiful love letter to Somerset that I've ever seen. It's absolutely stunning. How did you come to be working on this project?
So this is probably one of my favourite writing projects. The book I did was set up by two local journalists from the West Country, Perry Weir and Fanny Charles. And the idea of the book is to raise money for local charities whilst we're celebrating the roots of new communities. So we've done Dorset as a county, we've done Wiltshire, and then Somerset was our latest book. And then, the whole book will cover things like the arts, the history, places, and then I get to do the recipe section. So what I did was I explore the county as it is now. So I'm not looking at traditional recipes like Dorset cake, but I'm looking at who are the farmers, who are the producers, who can we celebrate right now, and then I'll create new recipes that include as many ingredients as possible. And then what we did, which was quite fun as well, is when we did the photo shoot, I also then included local potters, wood makers, glass blowers. So we were photographing on the artists from the area. And I think so far we've raised about over £100,000 for local charities, which is pretty great going.
That's incredible.
And like you say, King Charles wrote the foreword to Deepest Somerset because he has a lot of land there, but he really understands the importance of connecting to the land that feeds you and that surrounds us.
I love the way you've connected the pottery. It was one of the things that really struck me when I looked through the book, that you're going to be eating something that's been handmade and hand grown off something that has been handmade itself. And there's some like beautiful synergy to all of those things coming together for that experience. Because how the pottery, the cutlery, the whole thing is part of your experience, isn't it? When you're having a meal, it's not just the food, it's all of it.
For sure. I mean, I think people can get very focused on, picking up a nice plate or a nice piece of cutlery is delightful. But also, so is sitting on a riverbank eating with a wooden fork. So it's funny how...
And that's part of it, though, isn't it? That's important part of where you are by a riverbank or wherever it may be.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as a private chef, I get to help, or I enjoy laying a lot of tables. So I love kind of playing with different people, like the French linen or beautiful candlesticks or family heirlooms. Actually, family heirlooms are a bit scary to put out just in case you drop one. And you're like, that's been in the family for 100 years. And actually, I didn't drop one, but I did work for a client up in Scotland, and they had these beautiful, very fine glasses with their family crest on in their kind of, silver safe. And, I think they were about 200 years old. But, it was terrifying every time we got them out and had to wash them and just, carefully put them back away. But what was interesting is because back in the day, you wouldn't have big wine goblets. You'd have you'd drink through toasting. So, and there'd be lots of, there's not lots of staff now in these houses. But back in the day, there was lots of staff. So every time someone took a drink, there were enough people to keep topping up. And so the guests were a bit like, this is ridiculously small wine glasses. But it's just that's how they were, and, how amazing to get to use them.
Yeah, and it keeps it cold then, doesn't it? Or aerates it more, probably. It's amazing. One of the things I did notice in here is that you made a jam from whortleberry?
Ah, yes, that was the Somerset book. I think they're wild blueberries. And I think as well, actually, I have to remember this, they used to get the children in the Second World War to pick them, and they used to get them to use them to dye the, must have been the pilots' uniforms with, because they're obviously the colour is so extraordinary in them.
Incredible. Yeah, you've written about the RAF uniforms being dyed from there. I just read that little snippet and just thought it was the most incredible story of the heritage of the land. Just amazing.
And what a lovely name, Whortleberry.
Yeah, Whortleberry. Just epic.
It's going to be in a hand cream next, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. So what have you got coming up now? Where are you off to?
Yes, I'm off to Marseille, and then that's my kind of final big job of the summer. I've got some festivals coming up. So I'll be at Aldborough Food Festival, which is on the 28th of September. I'm doing a cookery demo there with championing wild British venison, because we should all be eating, if we're going to eat one thing, it should be wild British venison at the moment. We've got a definitely overpopulation of them. It's hugely nutritious, hugely sustainable. So it is the meat that we should all be focusing on. So I'm going to do a cookery demo in Suffolk at Aldborough Festival. And also, whenever I do cookery demos, I always try and use as many local producers and ingredients as possible. And Suffolk is one of those extraordinary counties that's just got, it's like fen firm dairy, the gorgeous cultured butter, Sandling's saffron, so home, beautiful saffron grown. Well, that's Essex, but close enough. Yeah, great wine, gin. So yeah, I'm going to use this whole kind of explosion of local produce with my wild venison.
Amazing. So listeners could come if they live near Aldborough Food Festival. What are the dates for that one?
So that's on the 27th and 28th of September, and I'm on at 3:00 on the Sunday doing my cookery demo. I'm going to do some comparing, and I might be on I'm going to be a food panel as well, talking about the kind of the evolution of eating and wild food. But that's that data that time is yet to be confirmed.
That sounds super interesting. And I know you've been very discreet about all the different people that you've chefed for, but are there any famous or very memorable people that you can tell us about? Any particular stories?
Yeah, well, as you say, one has to be discreet. But I'm actually, it turns out, I've realised over the kind of 15 years of being a private chef, I'm actually really bad at recognising famous people. I was working for, this is fairly early on, but I was working for a client in Holland Park and doing a dinner party. And they were like, I've got a friend dropping over some kittens that I'm going to look after while he goes away. Do you mind opening the door? Because I'm going to go up and get changed before the guests arrive. I was like, no problem. So anyway, prepping away in the kitchen. Doorbell goes, and there's this guy there with these two little ginger kittens, and he comes to the kitchen, and we're kind of chatting away, and I'm making watermelon margaritas, and like, I'm here, I hear you're going off. He says, yeah, I'm doing music, and I've got to go away. And I said, oh wow, it's amazing to get to tour, with music. Well done you. I've got some friends who are musicians. I know, like it's a tough gig. He's this guy.
It's like a Notting Hill moment here.
And then my client comes down, and the doorbell goes, and it's the next guest. And so this guy with the little ginger kittens goes back out and kind of hands over the kittens. And then the first guest comes to the kitchen. And says, it's such a shame that Ed can't stay for supper. I'm like, who's Ed? Ed Sheeran, the guy with the kittens.
No way.
He must have thought I was a complete idiot. Or maybe it was nice, like not being recognised. The ginger kittens should have given it away, maybe.
Yes,
I'm actually hopeless at recognising famous people, even if I'm standing in front of them and chatting for about 20 minutes.
There was one story you told me about at some point that was about where you'd been working or something for like 8 days on the trot, doing 16-hour shifts, and then you were asked to do just one more dinner party, and it was a really special guest.
Well, so, it's funny, being a private chef, when they talk about restaurant chefs, they talk about the long hours, but private chef, like you are on, or you can be on like 24/7 because you're living and traveling with people. So I was cooking for a stalking party in Scotland, and that involves getting up at 6, making a big breakfast, and then laying out this kind of Dickensian groaning feast on the table of like roast hams, roast beefs, homemade kind of like brownies, packets of hula hoops, because everyone loves a hula hoop on the hill, for the people going out stalking to go and shoot the venison, to kind of stuff their lovely barbers and tweed jackets with. And then you might go off shopping. So I'm just, my week was just really busy. Then the shopping trip would take 3 hours because you're in the middle of nowhere. So you have to get the shop back in, make afternoon tea, make cocktails, canapes, 3-course dinner. You're in bed by 11, half 11, back up and again at 6 to start it all over again. And so my client was like this totally kind of sparkling socialite. She loved loved entertaining. She was having the who's who of guests there that week. And by Sunday morning, she was like, you know what would be really fun, Philippa? Is if we do a dinner party in Edinburgh tonight at my home. I'll rebook your flights. You can come and stay with me. And like, you know, young and enthusiastic, like, yeah, sure, let's do it. She's like, yeah, we'll take some venison from the estate. It'll be amazing. And I'm going to invite Tom and Adrian. I was like, oh, okay. Who are Tom and Adrian? And she's like, well, Tom is Tom Kitchen, and you know, the most kind of famous Michelin-starred chef in Scotland. I was like, oh, great. And Adrian, you might know better as A.A. Gill. I was like,
no.
So A.A. Gill being Britain's most feared food critic at the time. I mean, he, you know, brilliant man, very witty, but just such a sharp pen. Like he really could lay into someone. And so we drive back down to Scotland. I'm kind of planning my menu. I'm taking ingredients from the lodge that we've hired back down to her kitchen, and she kind of drops me off at her house, and you know, she's like, she's off to do something with the kids. She says, well, Adrian's already at home, he'll let you in. So I kind of there with my bags, my haunches of venison, and her beautiful big townhouse in Edinburgh. And, you know, the door creaks open, and there he was very tall and slender. So the kind of shadowy A.A. Gill lets me in, kind of walks me down the long, dark corridor to the kitchen. And the kitchen as well was so intimidating, because it was like dark wood and beautiful mahogany floorboards, big Chesterfield sofa, huge black marble centre aisle, you know, and I just felt like this really tiny little chef in the kitchen. And then what made it worse is that I'm very tired and I want to impress Adrian, and you know, I always want to impress people, but you know, it's just nice to kind of do a good job. But then he sits there in the kitchen while I'm preparing supper, reading a book, and occasionally just like poking his head over the book and his eyebrows lifting up, just seeing what I was doing. Dang. And then I ended up having to like triple cook the chips, because I'd kind of boiled them, and I overboiled the first batch of potatoes. Like, well, I can't serve those. And then I knocked the second batch on the floor just out of nerves. And then finally I get my triple cooked roast potatoes in the oven. And then worse still, I thought, again, when you start off in a new career, quite often I think, you know, you try and do more than you have to feel that you're succeeding, because you want to prove that you can do it. So you kind of run 1,000 miles an hour, and really ultimately, you know, you'd be better off focusing your time and energy more acutely. So I thought, I know, I'm gonna try and impress him. I'm gonna make apple tart tatin, like I make my own puff pastry, which is nuts to do, like, you know, when I'm tired and there's actually no time to do it. So I'm trying to fold the pastry, get the cold butter in, put it in the fridge, bring it out again. I know, I kick myself now for being so silly back then, but anyway. And then, you know, they're eating the venison, so I get the tart tatin in the oven, and I was thinking, oh, it's going to be great. You know, the apples looked amazing. They were really lush, buttery, dark caramel, just the right kind of softness. Got my pastry on top, and I bring it out of the oven, and it's kind of, the pastry is as flat as a pancake, and I try a little bit, and it's like this leathery shoe sole. I was like, no! But, you know, as a private chef, you just have to get past the post. There is no, right, well, the restaurant's closed or you're not having dessert. So I kind of whipped this kind of leathery sole off the top of my beautiful caramelized apples. I found some, I think it was like amaretti biscuits in the cupboard, crunched them over, whipped some cream, and like redid dessert. But yeah, it was certainly a kind of test to like persevering basically, and just adapting as you go, because you know, you just have to keep going when you're in that kind of intense environment.
Yeah, and how to fix a problem under pressure in that moment and be like, slight change to the plan, but actually this is better. Maybe.
And you have well, it was certainly better than my pastry. But, you know, there's no backup. You know, in a restaurant, when the ship starts sinking, you know, you'll turn your head around and be like, oh, can you help me prep this? Or can you grab that for me? You know, I remember when I first started private chefing, I turned my head around thinking, oh, no, wait, it's just me in the kitchen. I've got to save myself.
That's incredible. Yeah, there's no one to ask. There's no boss. I think people always find that, don't they, when they become, you know, self-employed in that way, that you look around waiting for a grown-up to come and help. Realise you are the grown-up that's supposed to help.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many extraordinary things about being self-employed, and it's funny, I don't think I could go back to working in restaurants now. I love being my own boss. I love the variety. You know, you wake up every morning and you don't really know what that email or text is going to come through asking you, oh, Philippa, do you mind popping to the Caribbean with us? Like, no, I don't. That's fine. But it just, it keeps you highly energized.
Well, you've convinced me. I now want to be a private chef. It's a shame I'm a fairly average cook, because it sounds really fun. So if our listeners want to get in touch with you or ask any questions, is the best place to find you on your Instagram?
Yeah, so I try and share as discreetly as possible, but there are glimpses of my clients' houses on there if you're interested, and their beautiful cutlery and pottery collections. But yeah, on my Instagram, Philippa Davis Food. And I'm really trying to share the kind of like simple, stylish tips and tricks of how you can bring this into your own home cooking. So whether that's how to kind of make a cocktail or a nice salad or lay a table nicely, because you pick up so many things as a private chef, because obviously you're in people's homes, so it's more practical maybe than a restaurant chef might see it, because you've got all your kind of perfect equipment and stuff in a restaurant, whereas in the home it can be very different how you have to approach kind of particularly feeding the masses.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, I follow you already, Philippa Davis Food, and I love it. I love your updates of seeing where you are in some like beautiful Santorini setting, or goodness knows where you are. It looks absolutely stunning. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy global life to come and answer questions. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me on. It's been great to chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. You've been listening to Food Rebels, which is available on radio stations around the UK and further afield. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Audible. Please remember to subscribe and rate us with 5 stars or follow us. It makes such a difference, not just to our podcast and radio show, but it really helps to support the guests that come on the show with us. We're also on Instagram at food_rebels. So give us a follow, do get in touch. We love hearing from you and let us know what you think. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure you taste the rebellion.